All right, well, go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us and welcome to our next Forward in Energy Forum. We appreciate you all joining us virtually here today. My name is Scott Williams. I'm the Research and Education Coordinator at the Wisconsin Energy Institute here at UW-Madison. If this is your first time joining us for one of our events, the Wisconsin Energy Institute's mission is to provide leadership on campus for multidisciplinary research, education, and outreach efforts with the goal of accelerating the world's transition to clean energy systems and solutions. The Forward in Energy Forum is part of our efforts at WI to cultivate public understanding of energy issues. And this is a monthly series that brings together experts on and off campus to discuss the many dimensions of our global transition to cleaner energy systems. Our goal is to encourage cross-disciplinary dialogue to explore the important technical, social, political, and economic dimensions of a wide variety of clean technology innovations and issues. And so as we look toward next week's UN climate talks in Glasgow, we've heard from many organizations in the World Health community about the impacts of both air pollution and climate change. And they've been sounding the alarm that these are two of the greatest threats to global public health. We also know that air pollution and climate impacts disproportionately affect vulnerable populations, including low income and racial minority communities. But the good news is that with the right approach, we can develop solutions that can simultaneously address air quality, climate, and equity concerns. And so our panel today will discuss air quality in Wisconsin and the Midwest, communities that are affected, and the potential for a multi-solving approach to air quality, climate, and equity. Just a few brief announcements before we launch into today's forum. First, next month's forum will be on Tuesday, November 30th, with the topic being agriculture and carbon markets. This is a topic that's gained a lot of interest in Wisconsin, obviously in the agricultural state, about paying farmers to sequester carbon in soils. And so we'll have a panel discussing that topic. You can see the lineup of speakers on our slide here. And the registration is open, so you can click on the link to join us for next month's forum. And second, I would like to acknowledge that the land that the Wisconsin Energy Institute occupies, as well as all of UW-Madison, is the ancestral home of the Ho-Chunk people, who have called this land Dejope since time immemorial. The Ho-Chunk Nation and the 11 other First Nations residing in the boundaries of present-day Wisconsin remain vibrant and strong. We recognize and respect the inherent sovereignty of the 12 First Nations that reside in the boundaries of the state of Wisconsin. And also want to acknowledge that tribal nations are doing some of the most important and leading work in transitioning toward clean and just energy systems. Finally, a couple of logistical notes. You may see that we have live captioning turned on. You can toggle this feature using the live transcript button. And then finally, we ask you to submit your questions in the Q&A box. We'll do our best to address your question. You do have the ability to upvote your question or other attendees' questions, and our moderator will look at those questions and address them to the appropriate panelists. So to help us moderate the session and introduce our panelists, we're pleased to have Dr. Carol Barford, who is an associate scientist and the director for the Nelson Institute Center for Sustainability and the Global Environment, also known as SAGE. SAGE brings together researchers from natural, health and social sciences, engineering, and other fields to study problems stemming from the interactions between environmental systems, natural resources, and human activity, and to inform technology policy solutions. So Dr. Barford's work centers on agriculture, food, environmental quality, and related risks. So welcome, Dr. Barford.
All right, thank you, Scott, very much. I'm so happy to be here and to take part in this Forward in Energy Forum. I would also like to welcome everybody who's attending, and especially our panelists who have taken time out of their very busy schedules to talk to us today about clean air, climate, and equity. We are going to have invite each of our panelists to give opening remarks of about 5 minutes. I'm going to introduce each panelist in turn right before they speak. And then we'll have a generous opportunity for question and answer after that. So our first speaker is Gail Good. She is Air Management Program Director at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. She began this role in October of 2015 after serving for 3 years as the Air Monitoring Section Chief and 12 years as a dispersion modeler in the permit program at the Wisconsin DNR. In addition, Gail is active in the National Association of Clean Air Agencies, serving as co-chair of the Emissions and Modeling Committee. She's also serving a second term on the Federal Clean Air Act Advisory Committee. Gail has a master's in atmospheric science and a master's in air resources management, both from University of Wisconsin-Madison. So welcome, Gail.
Carol, thanks very much for that introduction. As Carol said, I'm Gail Good, Director of the Air Management Program at the Wisconsin DNR. I'm really excited to be a part of this panel. And as the state regulator on the panel, I hope to give you a little insight as to what the Air Management Program does, what our air quality is like right now, and what we're doing to address air pollution concerns. So I'll be sharing with you how the Air Management Program is utilizing a big picture, multifaceted approach to resolving our most challenging air pollution issues, and how climate and environmental justice considerations can be prongs of the work my program is tasked with doing to address statewide air quality. So I seldom start a chat like this without referencing the Clean Air Act and the framework that it provides for regulatory work. The Act and the amendments stand today as one of the most comprehensive and influential bodies of legislation ever enacted. You're likely aware that the Act was established at a time when thick, dense, visible smog was commonplace in our nation's cities and industrial centers. So fortunately, for the most part, our nation's air quality is much improved from that beginning, but there are still issues to resolve, and the complexity, both the issue and the potential resolution, has definitely increased. It's my job as a regulator to implement the Act, which was designed to protect public health and welfare from different types of air pollution caused by a variety of pollution sources. Over the years, Wisconsin has made a lot of progress relative to what the Act refers to as some of the common pollutants, things like lead, ozone, oxides of nitrogen, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and ozone. Annually, my program releases a trends report to present official state monitoring data. This year's report just came out, includes nearly 20 years of data through 2020, and I'll highlight a few items in that report. So first of all, it's important to know Wisconsin has a persistent lakeshore ozone problem along the eastern shore of our state. The geography and the meteorology in that area are conducive to ozone formation over Lake Michigan that then makes its way on shore with afternoon lake breezes. So additionally, the type of weather conditions that lead to ozone formation also bring transported emissions to us from out of state. And that's really important. That's a big component of some of our air quality, especially our ozone issues today. So even with this phenomena, this conducive meteorology, the air quality on the lakeshore relative to ozone concentrations has seen significant improvement. Really a 25% average reduction in monitored ozone concentrations from 2001 to 2020. That's great. Moving to a different pollutant, Wisconsin has had in the past, had areas of the state that could not attain or achieve the current fine particle or PM 2.5 standard. At this time, all areas of the state are well below the current standard. And since the early 2000s, PM 2.5 concentrations have decreased by 35%, which is great. Another success story that I just want to share quickly in Wisconsin is associated with sulfur dioxide emissions. And this one's kind of, to me, kind of interesting and kind of gets this even more to this multifaceted approach. So this pollutant was a major concern for the state in the late 70s and into the 80s. SO2 in Wisconsin, or sulfur dioxide, tends to come from combustion that occurs at power plants and paper mills. So we saw tremendous improvements in this pollutant, or declines in concentrations and emissions throughout the 90s. And since the early 2000s, emissions statewide have declined by over 90%, which is incredible. So while we still have one sulfur dioxide area that's not meeting the current standard, we worked really hard with the source responsible for that and with EPA. We're on a clear path to redesignating that area. It's up in Rhinelander. And we've been meeting the standards for that area has been meeting standards for sulfur dioxide since 2017, which is great. So Wisconsin's criteria pollutant successes are notable, but obviously there's still parts of the state that are not meeting standards or experiencing higher concentrations. And a large amount of our remaining pollution issues can be attributed to things like mobile sources. Things like light duty vehicles, heavy duty trucks, off-road vehicles, marine vessels, and more really contribute a significant percentage of our monitored concentrations around the state. You might be aware of EPA's recently proposed greenhouse gas standards for light duty vehicles. And while these standards will clearly address greenhouse gases, what's great is the additional stringency that's proposed in these standards will have long-term co-benefits for other pollutants. So that'll help us out with things like our ozone issue and more. So that's great. There's a strong push right now for EPA to quickly propose a heavy duty vehicle package that will address greenhouse gases and other criteria or common pollutants too. Major highway trucking corridors often cross environmental justice areas. So bringing down mobile source pollution will have multiple benefits across a variety of key concerns. I wanted to mention too, Wisconsin is experiencing a change in energy and electricity generation, which positively impacts multiple pollutants. So operating coal capacity in Wisconsin's EGU fleet has declined dramatically from 2005 through 2018. And I'll tell you why that 2018 date matters in just a moment. While natural gas capacity has increased by almost as much. We've got 8 additional coal units in the state that have announced retirement dates through 2025. And 4 of those are in Oak Creek, which is an area that could be identified as an area with environmental justice concerns or considerations. So the push to renewable energy sources is allowing the state to recognize benefits regarding criteria, pollutant concentrations, greenhouse gases, and environmental justice. The air management program has taken an active role in climate change issues and environmental justice concerns. So even here, while we're waiting for EPA to provide guidance and authority in accordance with their goals, my program's taken on a number of initiatives that I wanted to mention. Last year, we released a greenhouse gas emissions inventory report that utilized the EPA state inventory tool and some default data. And this year, we've been able to work with a number of partners to update that report to produce a phase 2 report with state-specific data. I mentioned that I would tell you why 2018 mattered. This phase 2 report is going to include data through 2018, which is the most current we've got. So that's great. This is a critical step. This report's a critical step in resolving some of Wisconsin's climate change concerns, because this report is intended to be used by policymakers to ensure that they have access to the data that will help them make decisions about how to efficiently and effectively manage this issue. We've also been working with one of my co-panelists, Tracy, to quantify emissions impacts and health benefits from the current electric vehicle fleet to better understand how that sector fits into some of our goals and policy decisions. So resolving our air quality concerns with a truly multifaceted approach involves also increasing accessibility and transparency, especially to the public. The Clean Air Act recognized the value of public participation and input. We recognize that regulatory programs, especially the air program, can be really complex. So we've been rewriting some of our guides on public participation and commenting. And this past September, we offered a webinar along with EPA that really explored community engagement and commenting on the different types of things that the air program does, like permitting or development of submittals to EPA. So additionally, we provide a lot of resources on our website to citizens on a multitude of sensor devices that are available to help them monitor their own air quality and really get involved and engaged in what's going on in their community. We look forward to expanding our accessibility and our approachability in the public arena. So I hope this has helped shed a little bit of light on Wisconsin's air management program, some of our air quality successes and concerns, and some of the ways that we're taking a multifaceted approach to air pollution management. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Gail. I'm going to move right on to our second speaker, who is Langston Verdeen. Langston is Director of Health Strategy for the City of Milwaukee Health Department. He leads a dynamic team to advance community engagement, systems innovation, and policy strategies aimed at meeting the overall mission and goals of the City of Milwaukee Health Department. Before, he has served as Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Children's Health Alliance of Wisconsin. In that role, he built community-based partnerships to improve asthma management, enhance quality of life, reduce disparities, and prevent asthma-related deaths. In addition, he oversaw management of the Wisconsin Asthma Coalition, a diverse group comprised of more than 250 members spanning various professions statewide. Langston has over 15 years experience in public health and is committed to creating environments where children and families thrive. He received his Master's of Public Health degree from UW Milwaukee's Zilber School of Public Health with a focus on public health policy and administration, and he's an alumnus of Marquette University's Future Milwaukee program. Langston has a passion for community justice and is co-founder of Milwaukee's Summer of Peace initiative. Established in 2002, this youth-led nonviolence program has touched the lives of tens of thousands of children and recently expanded with an annual peace summit on Chicago's South Side. So welcome, Langston.
Thank you, and thank you all for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk to you about a cool project that I brought to life and under my role within Children's Health Alliance, managing the Wisconsin Asthma Coalition. The project is called Project Breathe Smart, which stands for Safely Monitoring Air Around Town, because everything needs a clever acronym, right? I started this project because in my role, I work really closely with the Department of Health Services asthma program in Madison to analyze asthma-related data and find interventions to improve asthma health in Wisconsin. What I noticed when we started doing some basic mapping of where those kind of asthma hotspots were, specifically in Milwaukee County, is that it was not surprisingly in areas of high poverty, which is consistent really all across the country. But when I looked at the map in Milwaukee, being from Milwaukee, I noticed something really peculiar. Those areas where we found the highest concentrations of ED utilization and hospitalizations that were related to asthma, they followed heavily trafficked areas, primarily Fond du Lac Avenue, which is Highway 145 in our area, as well as the National Avenue and Lincoln Avenue kind of corridors of Milwaukee's near South Side. And so it made me start to think, because there's other areas of higher poverty in Milwaukee that don't see as much utilization. So I started wondering what else might be going on here. And I didn't know where to go. So I looked at the DHS's air quality maps. And what I found was that there was one sensor on Milwaukee South Side, and then there's another couple sensors on the far North Shore area of Milwaukee County. And so that didn't really give me enough data about the community level impact of pollution, specifically from transportation related pollution in our area. So I reached out to an organization called IQ Air, which produces these little air quality units. They are consumer level air quality units. Right now it's saying my CO2 is out of control in my home because I'm breathing right on the thing. And so I reached out to them and I said, can you all help me with this problem? They've got sensors all over the world. And I found them right around the time of the Australian wildfires, which seems like eons ago because of COVID and everything we've been dealing with. And they've been such a great partner with us on this project. And they started off by donating us 2 of these units to utilize. And we quickly found homes for those in some of our hotspot communities. Another cool thing is my daughter has been helping me build these little weather boxes. This one doesn't have a lid just yet, but you can see they're just these wooden boxes that we put these vents on, and the air monitoring unit sits inside. And it's all linked up to our IQ Air website. Beyond that, though, the really cool thing is we are expanding the program so that childcare centers, schools can utilize the information that we're able to gather right from these sensors. IQ Air has linked us up with projects in California, which do similar air quality monitoring. And what we learned is that we don't really need to place one of these monitors within a mile or two of each other. It's essentially the same information. And so we're strategically placing these monitors all over the city of Milwaukee. We have 5 of them placed right now, with another one that will be coming online probably in the next month or so. We're just dealing with some Wi-Fi issues in our area that we're utilizing. What we hope to do with this information now is to, one, we'll work really closely, like I said, with the schools and childcare centers so that their teachers can install this app on their phone and they get real-time notification when the air quality is worsening. Not only that, so if this was orange or red, I could click on it and it will tell me what to do with that information. Right now, all across Milwaukee, we're pretty good as it relates to air quality. Well, so it will say, spend less time outdoors. If you have to go outdoors, wear a mask, which we're all used to by now. So it's not even weird when you're walking around wearing a mask. When we first started this project, that would have been really strange. Now it's common practice, obviously. So we're making sure schools, teachers, educators have the tools to keep their kids safe. Once we collect more data, we're working with folks like Tracy, as well as DHS, to do some comprehensive analysis on the air quality issues in our areas, because we're able to pull that data on an hourly basis up to a year, backdated to a year, and then compare it to asthma-related ED utilizations near our sensors. So I'm really excited once we get to the point to start analyzing that data, to then, depending on what it shows us, to advocate for policy change in these communities that really need the support. So it's a really exciting project. Mostly I've been doing it on my spare time because we don't have a grant or anything like that to pay for it. And with the help of my daughter to build these units, it's been an awesome bonding father-daughter experience as well. So that's been a nice perk. IQ Air is releasing a new sensor that doesn't require a box. It's completely waterproof. And so we'll be transitioning to those in the near future as well. The great thing about IQ Air is everything they've been sending us has been free. It's been part of their community benefits program. So I've mentioned them a lot. They don't pay me, but they're a great partner. So if you want to link up to our sensors in the Milwaukee area, just go to iqair.com. You can create an account or not, but if you do, then you can get those notifications if you're in the Milwaukee area. And who knows, there might be sensors in your community as well that you could link into to make sure you can keep yourself and your kids safe as well. So yeah, I'm excited about the project. I look forward to chatting with you all some more. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Langston. I got questions brewing already, but our next speaker is Christopher Tessman. He's assistant professor of civil and environmental engineering at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. His research focuses on modeling air pollution and health impacts, quantifying inequities in the distribution of those impacts, and proposing and testing solutions. He studies the relationship between emissions, the human activities that cause them, and the resulting health impacts, and develops modeling capabilities to enable these analyses. Before he went to University of Illinois in Urbana, Chris Tessman was a research scientist in civil and environmental engineering at the other UW in Seattle, and a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Bioproducts and Biosystems Engineering at University of Minnesota. He received a PhD in civil and environmental and geoengineering and a BME in mechanical, all from University of Minnesota. So welcome, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. So I'm an air pollution researcher mainly. I do run air quality models. So most of the modeling that I do is for the kind of the whole country, but it's applicable here too in Wisconsin. I'm also a resident of the Midwest. So it's been known for a long time that the people of color are exposed to more air pollution than white people. So there's kind of a pretty large academic literature on this that goes back to the 1980s with Robert Bullard. And there's probably an even longer legacy of people kind of advocating against this and trying to change it. And so, but what we've seen over time, and some of my research has been looking at, is that over time the air pollution concentrations have been going down because we've been successfully regulating them. And because of that, the absolute differences in concentrations in between racial ethnic groups has also been decreasing. But what we've been seeing is that the kind of, if you look at the percent difference, like, you know, what percentage higher are the exposures of Black people, Hispanic people, and other people of color compared to white people, that those percentages have been staying the same. So that kind of suggests that we haven't been, you know, while we've been successfully regulating and controlling the overall exposure to air pollution, we haven't been successfully improving this disparity, especially this kind of relative percent disparity. And that's important because, you know, people care about their absolute like level of exposure to toxic pollution, but they also care what their level of exposure is compared to, you know, the other people around them. Right. And so, and some of the research I've been doing is to kind of look at like what could we do to improve on this in the future. And so we've looked at kind of what are the source types of pollution that are causing this exposure, and we kind of were thinking going in that it would be just like a couple of types of sources, maybe like mobile sources, as we've been talking about, or industry or power plants. And then we could just, you know, maybe that would be different in different cities, where we could just kind of go in and control those sources and then improve the problem. And that's kind of like, as a air quality management engineer, that's kind of like what we're trained to do, you know, figure out what's causing the problem, and then you go in and control that source at the source, and it makes things better. But what we've been finding is that there's not just like several sources of air pollution that are causing this problem. It turns out that it's almost the vast majority, or it's the vast majority of the different source types that are contributing to or causing more exposure to colored people, to people of color than to white people, and it's coming from the almost all of the sectors. And so that suggests that if we want to really fix this problem, that we need to maybe start to rethink the way that we approach air quality management. And so one thing is that we've been kind of seeing is that typically when we do controls of air pollution, we control them by source. Like, you know, if we have power plants causing acid rain, then we control the emissions from the power plants kind of throughout the country. But what we're seeing in the results that we're getting is that in order to improve this inequity and exposure to air pollution, we may really need to be looking by location. So looking in specific neighborhoods that are hotspots for these areas, and controlling pollution there and the pollution that's contributing to the pollution there. And then the other thing is that it's, you know, even if we control pollution in a certain area that has historically been a problem, you know, there can be kind of so we're gentrifying that happens, and then it ends up pushing the people, you know, the members of the community out of their community. So for that reason, that, you know, it may be much more important to actually, you know, the process of how we solve these problems and how we discuss these problems may be a lot more important than the actual technologies that we use to control the pollution. So that's my intro. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris. We have one more speaker batting cleanup. The fourth speaker is Tracy Hollowey. She is the current Gaylord Nelson Distinguished Professor here at UW-Madison, jointly appointed in the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies and the Department of Atmospheric and Ocean Sciences. Tracy is an air quality scientist working at the intersection of air quality, energy, climate, and public health. She is the team lead for the NASA Health and Air Quality Applied Sciences team, or HACAST, which connects NASA data with stakeholder interests in air quality management and public health. Tracy also leads efforts to promote energy analysis and policy graduate certificate program in the Nelson Institute. The EAP graduate certificate is the only energy-related graduate certificate at UW-Madison. Tracy is also co-founder and served as the first president of the Earth Science Women's Network, which was featured in the journal Nature. And ESWN's mission is supporting scientists of today and welcoming a diverse community of scientists for tomorrow. She was the first ever recipient of MIT's C3E Award in Education and Monitoring, a Stanford University Leopold Leadership Fellow, a AAAS Leshner Leadership Fellow, a TEDx speaker, and was awarded the 2018 UW-Madison Undergrad Research Student Mentoring Award. So welcome, Tracy.
Thank you, Carol, for that nice introduction. And it's just such an honor to follow the three speakers who have presented so far. And actually, I hate to start out with a very small correction, but actually this summer, my honor of being the Gaylord Nelson Distinguished Professor has been transferred to my colleague, Monica White, who is a leader in environmental justice, especially around food security and urban farming. So I just want to make sure credit goes where credit is due. And but I am so excited with so many topics, and I could certainly talk for more than 5 minutes, but I'll try to hit on a few major themes. My work really deals with air quality and its connections with energy, health, and climate. And in fact, many of the topics that our speakers have raised today connect with some of the ongoing work of my team and my students. And in a big picture way, we're thinking about what's next for clean air and clean air regulation in the United States and around the world. And as Gail mentioned at the beginning of this session, that in many ways, air quality is an environmental success story. Starting in 1970, air pollution regulations have reduced health damaging air pollution dramatically almost everywhere across the United States, but there are still persistent problems. And one of those challenges is due to the fact that we actually don't know what air pollution is everywhere. About 2/3 of US counties have no monitor whatsoever. And as Langston mentioned, even in a big city like Milwaukee that has quite a few monitors for different pollutants, individual neighborhoods may not have enough information to inform small scale spatial patterns. And so then there's this question of, what do you do when you don't have a monitor to tell you what's in the air? And there are really, 3 solutions to that problem. One that Langston mentioned is this group of monitors called kind of collectively low-cost monitors. And IQ Air is one of the big companies that is promoting these low-cost monitors. Another is called Purple Air. And here in Madison, there are quite a few Purple Air monitors around, especially on the Near East side. A second kind of complementary data set to the existing monitors that Gail and experts like her across the US have been publicly maintaining are computer models. And the EPA has developed some amazing state-of-the-art computer models that can be run to look at hour by hour, minute by minute chemistry and wind patterns to show how air pollution is evolving across the United States. And these computer models are really powerful. That's the core of my work as well. But they sometimes have a problem because they are harder to run as you get to finer and finer and finer scales. So actually, even computer model data is not usually well suited for looking at neighborhood to neighborhood differences in air pollution. With one exception, the model developed by Chris Tessman, who is one of our speakers, is really the only model currently available in the world that allows examination of neighborhood by neighborhood patterns of air pollution and how they respond to energy changes that can be run from the city scale to the state to the national scale. And I'm really excited. I'm working with a graduate student here at Wisconsin, Clara Jackson, and we have funding from Madison Gas and Electric, where we've been running Dr. Tessman's model over Madison and over Wisconsin. So those results are still kind of in process, but it's such an exciting tool because it can help fill this gap. But a third data set that also is one that I'll spend the rest of my time talking about is satellite data, because I lead the team for NASA to make satellite data more relevant for air quality managers like Gail and public health experts like Langston and organizations from UNICEF and the World Health Organization down to individual cities and stakeholders. And a priority topic for this NASA team is environmental justice. And that's really because there's an awareness that we just don't have enough ground level information to know what people are breathing. And that's true within a city. That's true if you look at rural areas and tribal communities. And it's true if you look at countries around the world, many of which have no monitors whatsoever. And one of the exciting things about satellite data is that these instruments up in space can detect gases and particles that are even invisible to the human eye. And right now there's a portfolio of instruments up in space with really billions of dollars worth of investment. And all of the data are publicly available free. And many of the instruments see the whole world every day. So it's pretty amazing that we can see invisible pollution from outer space. It almost sounds like a science fiction story, and use that in a way that could potentially help fill these gaps. And I'll say that not only is there information available right now today, but that there's really a renaissance, in my opinion, of satellite data for air pollution coming. In 2022, the US is going to launch the first satellite that can orbit with the Earth, detecting air pollution every hour over North America. And this will provide information on nitrogen dioxide, on sulfur dioxide, and on other pollutants that are regulated by the Clean Air Act, that are indicators of emissions, that are relevant for environmental justice, and that pave the way for climate solutions as well. And the connection really, in my view, between air quality and climate is one that, some people actually confuse the two, and kind of CO2 and CO and SO2 and methane. I mean, there's so many different chemicals to keep track of. But, when we think about climate, it's really chemicals that are affecting the Earth's temperature and rain patterns. And when we think about air pollution, that the regulated air pollution under the Clean Air Act, it's chemicals in the air that make people sick and affect plants. And for the most part, these are two different sets of chemicals, for the most part. But coincidentally or not, they come from the same sources. So when we're taking cars off the road or moving to electric vehicles from clean electricity sources, we're getting a double win. We're fighting climate change and making the air cleaner where people are living and breathing. I was just on a call last week with a panel of different environmental organizations. And it was interesting because some were interested in climate, and they were trying to sort of show air quality and health benefits as a way to motivate change on climate. And others were interested in lung health and respiratory health. And they were interested in decarbonization because it's a pathway to clean air. And so whichever way you're interested in it, it's nice to know that it's a win-win with a lot of solutions that are ready to go and can make our air cleaner and start addressing climate change. So I'll end there.
Right. Thank you very much, Tracy. So we've had quite a bit of activity in the Q&A with answers being provided in some cases, but I'm going to go on a slightly different tack with a question for Gail. It's my understanding that before the Clean Air Act was made law, that there was some back and forth in Congress about whether to make ambient concentrations the standard for protecting air quality, or to mandate certain controls on emitters, a control-based strategy versus actually an air quality strategy. Do you think that there are echoes of this today in the network of monitors? We've been hearing that there aren't enough monitors in many cases. They aren't in the right places sometimes. Why are we stuck with this certain network of monitors, and how does that play out programmatically?
Great question. And there's a lot of questions in your question.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll try to catch all of those. And I did see a question come up also kind of along those same lines about, why air monitors are where they are. So I'll try to address that because I think that gets at part of your question. But I do want to mention, yeah, absolutely. We actually do manage air quality through both, really understanding what the ambient concentrations are, gathering trends over time, and using that information to, make decisions, make policy decisions, or even compliance and enforcement decisions in specific cases. And we also manage air quality through controls and control technology, especially when it comes to permitting decisions, like when we're trying to permit a really big source. There are certain control technology requirements that are mandated that we have to ensure in place or will be in place before they can get their permit. And then obviously we have to make sure they're complying with those requirements while they're operating. So to kind of answer the first part of your question, yeah, absolutely. And we get to do both of those things to manage air quality now through the Act. I think you also were asking a little bit, are we kind of stuck with this monitoring network? And monitors are placed throughout the state. Well, let me back up. I mentioned that I'm really implementing a federal program here, right? We're implementing the Clean Air Act. And so there are lots and lots of federal requirements, probably nowhere more than when it comes to monitoring. There are so many requirements, regulations, and just things that have to be met to have good, high quality monitoring data. The network itself is established through some of those federal requirements and gets evaluated each year. It has a public participation period as well to make sure that we're meeting all of the requirements that EPA sets out for us to have that statewide air quality network. The monitors themselves might have a range of different purposes, right? We might be wanting to understand something on a small scale or a regional scale. So there's additional requirements for where those monitors are placed depending on that. I think the monitoring network really gives us great information. Is it perfect information? Is it everything that we need to know? No. And Tracy really went through a lot of other good ways that we can understand air quality, especially in the places where those gaps are. Monitors, in order to be operational and have that data used, are rigorously tested. We have that ability to really trust that data. Things like the sensor technology, those are great too, often need kind of a conversion factor. So because they don't have quite that rigorous of requirements, which is fine. Those types of monitors certainly have so much place and so much use that I think isn't being fully explored right now. Hope that helps answer your question a little bit, and maybe a little bit about the prior question. I will note though that obviously we receive funding from the EPA to implement this program, so we can be resource constrained when it comes to setting up more monitors. So if I saw what can I do about that too? And sorry, Carol, I'm going way off your question here. I'm just trying to grab a few other questions. Those funding amounts, our funding is really set by Congress. And so I always encourage people to get, really engaged with your legislators, because that's where the funding comes from to be able to do this work.
All right.
I just added as well, I think one of the things I want to be clear of is like the air monitoring stations that I'm setting up and the purple air ones, things like that, they aren't meant to be a replacement for these really high tech systems that Gail is talking about. I mean, I've seen these things and they're gigantic and they take up a lot of space and there's a lot of things twirling and, and this is a little bitty consumer level product. And when we launched this project, it was really meant to just be an extra tool that families could utilize or schools could utilize to keep their kids and families safe. Not that folks could use when they have, oops, lost my audio, I think.
We can hear you now.
Lost me.
Whoops, okay, I got bandwidth problems perhaps with Langston. In between, I'm gonna ask.
Yeah, I think I lost my audio and everything. Can you guys hear me now?
Now we can hear you again.
Oh, fantastic. I don't know why my video's not working again, but Oh, there we go.
Yes.
So it's like I was saying, basically just wrapping up. It's meant to be an extra tool that families can utilize and not a full replacement.
Very good. In a little bit of work with Tracy that I've been involved with, I learned that monitors used to be essentially in the 40s and 50s. Early monitors were essentially wet chemistry labs that went around in a truck and were deployed on a campaign basis to address air quality emergencies. And now we have long-term monitoring, and now we even have consumer products. So what you can do changes over time. I want to turn to Chris and ask about the multi-scale modeling. I know that in climate modeling, it's a big trick to go from a global model down to a model with regional scale. It's not just like you draw a smaller square on the map and do the same thing. So can you please talk about, I assume it's EJ's screen, your model. Nope, sorry. You can tell me what the model is and how you did the multi-scale trick.
Yeah, so one thing about, like, a lot of time when people think about pollution, they think about, CO2. And the thing about CO2 is that, it gets emitted somewhere and it goes up and is, mixed around in the atmosphere. And like some places may have higher CO2 concentrations than other places, but within the kind of the range of what you see in the outdoors, it doesn't really matter, right? So, so really what matters is like the annual average, or not annual average, but like the global average concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, and that's what causes the warming. With non-CO2 air pollution, things like the fine particulate matter, your ozone, NO2, things like that cause kind of human health effects kind of directly. So those, it really does matter where the pollution is located. If you think about it, if you have an emission, like, if there, for example, was a big diesel generator sitting in the room here with me, I would care a lot more about that than if the diesel generator was like off in, the middle of a cornfield or the ocean or something like that. Right. And so when you're doing the air quality modeling, you really need to get the location right. And that's really the hardest part. Especially because when you have some emissions of air pollution, it will cause a relatively high impact to a relatively small number of people near the source, right? Because there's only a relatively small number of people near any one source. But then the pollution will actually also go and travel a long ways, usually, and can kind of affect a much larger number of people with a lower concentration. And so both of those things end up being about equally important. So we've done some studies to find that, about 25% of the health impacts from air pollution occur within about 8 kilometers of the source of pollution for PM 2.5, and another 25% happen more than 250 kilometers away, right? So those are kind of the scales that we work with. And so it turns out it's really difficult to capture both of those scales in an air quality model, because the air quality model is usually the ones that like connect the emissions to the concentrations, do so by splitting up the whatever domain they're running over, for example, like the United States, into grid cells, kind of boxes, and then it tracks how the pollution moves in between the boxes, and how it affects the ambient concentrations. So, and like the amount of computational time that it takes to run these models scales by approximately like the third power of the size of these grid cells, right? So if you try to, decrease the size of these grid cells, you end up really adding up your computational intensity really quickly. And so what this InMap model that I've developed does a couple of things, and it's kind of designed specifically to look at this kind of fine particulate matter pollution and looking at kind of these disparities among different neighborhoods. And so it's able to make some kind of different design trade-offs than these other models make. So a couple of things it does. The main one is it has these grid cells that vary, kind of can drastically vary in size among different locations. So you have really small grid cells in kind of high density areas and high population density areas, and then very much larger grid cells in kind of rural areas or over the ocean, in areas that we don't care about that much. And so that's kind of different from most of the other air quality models that can do a little bit of that, but not quite as flexibly as our air quality model can. And then the other part is it kind of makes some simplifications in the science behind like the kind of the chemistry and some of the physics about how these, how the transportation and the transformations and things like that are happening in the atmosphere. And so they're able, in order to do that, it's able to kind of, we're able to make these run these simulations that have, maybe a factor of 10 higher resolution, spatial resolution in the areas that we care about, but using like a factor of, 10 or something, 10,000 or so less computational power.
Awesome. That's a good trick. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. I would like to ask a question of Langston. I know that improving air quality is very expensive. Controls on pollution are very expensive, but yet the benefits are great. Benefits are, even just in dollars, they are worth more than the costs. So in your work with health, there are so many species that cause respiratory problems. How do you think about the costs and benefits of knowing more about which species is causing which problem in which populations versus thinking more big scale about combustion sources and other sources of all the bad stuff and how to go after that? Yes, that's the question.
Yeah, that's a great way to pose it too. And when you say which species, I was like humans primarily. We're the ones causing most of the problems. But frankly, I think as it relates to asthma and other respiratory issues, often, I mean, right around September, it's one of the highest or one of the most significant months where we see folks showing up in the emergency department because of asthma-related issues. There's a high pollen count around that time as well. And so you're having a lot of plant spores and particulates that are in the air that are causing these issues too, as well as, in the spring when things are growing. And so we do see trends that when we look at our data, we'll have to control for in April and September because of, naturally occurring pollens. But one interesting thing that someone posted in the comment about, like, what type of policies can you see? And one of the things that I've researched as a part of this project is around how we develop cities, what trees we plant. What I found, and maybe even Tracy may have forwarded this to me in the past, I can't remember if it was her or not, but when cities were developed, when many cities were developed, they picked trees based off of is it going to produce seeds? And so they will pick male trees. The male trees produce the most pollen. And so you'll have communities that have all male trees or predominantly male trees. And so they're producing more pollen. And so it's creating an issue for folks that have these respiratory issues. That's like one policy idea. I mean, obviously, that's if you're developing a new city or if you've got an opportunity to plant a bunch of trees, like having a diverse ecosystem as it relates to what you plant is so important.
Great. Yeah, I know that whenever you run into a ginkgo tree where they have the fruits, that's because they screwed up and they put out a female one. So anyway, thank you, Langston. Tracy, I wanted to ask about satellites and satellites that see air pollution. If you, what are the characteristics of an awesome satellite for seeing air pollution?
Well, the two things that we really, I guess three things is one, what can it see? And right now, nitrogen dioxide, NO2, has really emerged as kind of the darling of the satellite air pollution community because it's a gas in the atmosphere that satellites can see pretty well. And it comes from anything that burns. So it's a tracer of emissions from cars and trucks and power plants and forest fires. And, you know, one, not to get too nerdy, but one way that we compare different chemicals in the atmosphere is by what's called their lifetime. How long do they hang around after they've been emitted? And one issue is that a chemical like carbon dioxide that hangs around for 100 years or more means that it just builds up in the atmosphere. And then it's really hard to see with satellite where it came from. You just see the blobs, you don't see the sources. Whereas nitrogen dioxide, NO2, that only stays around for hours, maybe a day or two. And so what you see from satellite is really a fingerprint of where it was emitted. And many people on this call may have seen some of these satellite images of before and after the lockdowns in spring of 2020, when you could see vividly from space how the air pollution levels just plummeted. And that's what you were seeing, you know, they usually just said air pollution levels go down, but really what you were seeing was this nitrogen dioxide chemical that satellites can see pretty well. So, you know, I think one thing is trying to think about like, how can we use what we have from satellites to the maximum benefit? And I think one way is to use it to say, well, do we really know what we're emitting, where and when? Can we use it to understand the health impacts of, say, nitrogen dioxide directly? And can we use it to improve the computer models that we're using? I mean, sort of take what we have and push it as far as we can push it. And with that in mind, to me, the best satellite would be one that gives the data more frequently. And luckily that's coming next year, every hour, and that gives it at a higher resolution. And luckily that's coming all the time. Right now, the highest resolution gives data at about 5 kilometers by 7 kilometers. And you can even boost that a little bit more depending on how you analyze the data. I think that the downside, though, is that satellites don't see some of the chemicals that are most important for public health. For example, satellites don't see ground level ozone that, as Gail mentioned, was a big challenge for the eastern shore of Wisconsin and many other parts of the world. And satellites also don't see, satellites also don't see surface level fine particulate matter, like Chris mentioned, that is the #1 pollutant associated with premature death. They see indicators that can be used in sort of fancy ways to deduce ground level PM 2.5, but it's not directly observed. And so, you know, I think one thing that we found when we're having these conversations is that are satellites a direct plug-in for monitoring data? No, they are not. And an important thing to note is that they actually don't even see the surface. They see the whole column of air between the surface and space. So it's just not the same as what the monitors are showing us at nose level, but it can be helpful to fill the gaps. And I saw a couple of the questions around detecting CO2 and detecting methane. And yes, satellites can show those data sources. Depending on the instrument, it may have different levels of resolution. And so, for example, there are global estimates of methane, but methane stays in the atmosphere for about 10 years. So it also is sort of a big blob smushing around the northern hemisphere. But there are these new satellites, and one, for example, is run by a company called GHGSat. And they don't orbit the whole world. They're like deployable out in space, and they can zoom in on individual facilities like potential gas leaks, or they're often hired by oil and gas companies who wonder what if they're having a leak. And so then they can like move around the earth and like zap well, they don't really zap, but like detect what is happening with methane. So there is actually a whole generation of methane detecting satellites that's really on the horizon. And one of them is being funded by the Environmental Defense Fund. So there's reasons why industry are interested in these, and there's reasons why environmental groups are interested in these. And, with the work that I'm doing with NASA, we're agnostic. We're just trying to get everybody who can benefit from the data to use them.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. So I have a question, I believe is for all of you. So maybe I'll actually have to moderate, but the Biden administration is interested in environmental justice, and federal agencies have increasing interest in environmental justice. How is this playing out in your work, in your workplace, and your thinking about what is possible? I guess I'll throw that to Gail first.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. You're absolutely right. We are certainly seeing a focus on environmental justice. One thing that I'm really keeping an eye on is something that EPA is working through right now called Justice 40, where the intent is to provide, ensure that 40% of resources are going toward environmental justice issues. So EPA is still working through what that looks like and how they'll implement this Justice 40 initiative. But some early signs that we're hearing are that EPA will look at certain funding sources, especially things that are provided to the states. For example, DERA, which is a clean diesel program, primarily designed. We've participated in this for years, and it's designed to really retrofit or replace, dirtier diesel engines with cleaner ones, which is good. They're, EPA is kind of sort of early indicating that they could essentially kind of partition, some funding in that way to really address environmental justice issues, which is great. And you think about what has a diesel engine? Well, lots of things, but sometimes it's school buses, right? That our kids are on. So, being able to provide cleaner burning engines, I think for school kids is a really great thing. So, that's one place where we're seeing some potential. I'm also kind of seeing early indications of maybe some ports initiative work, really looking at some of our goods transport. Again, that kind of looks at mobile sources, right? A lot of us have talked about mobile sources and the impact there. And ports often tend to be in areas where we would have environmental justice concerns. And so I think utilizing that program and some of the funding opportunities there to really focus in on environmental justice concerns is good. I think we're going to hear a lot more about how the funding and associated requirements with that funding are going to come to for the state agencies that receive that funding. So it's definitely having an impact. I think there's a lot for us to pay attention to and to watch out for. That's just funding, doesn't even talk about some of the, permitting issues that are coming up and are going to come up. So I think a lot's more to come on this. Thanks for the question. It's a great one.
All right, thank you, Gail. Anybody else seeing an impact in your work environment, in your plans?
Maybe
I guess.
Oh, Chris,
you go.
no, you go.
Okay. Well, I mean, Tracy may know better than this, but I mean, for like the academic research world, it would affect our what we do, a lot of it through like increased funding for environmental justice work. As far as I know, that hasn't really happened yet, but from talking to project managers and things like that at the EPA, it seems like it will. And when it does, it will likely, a lot of it will come in the form of doing kind of academic research that is in partnership or conjunction with community groups, which is, something that is, it's difficult to do for us as researchers, because mainly just because the sense of time is very different in academia than it is almost anywhere else. Whereas, I may send like I may spend 6 years writing a paper, and then it gets published and it's out of the news or whatever. But I may have talked to some people in different community groups like 3 years ago, and they were interested then, and then like they lost interest because like took too long. So that's something that I think we're thinking about a lot. But also, if there's like anyone anyone on the in the webinar here that's would be interested in working together in that capacity, I'd definitely reach out.
Thanks. Thank you, Chris. Tracy had some comment as well.
Yeah, and actually, I think I'm really glad Chris went first because, he's exactly right. I think that, a lot of us who are doing academic research on air quality are motivated to solve real world problems. But there is this sort of mismatch of timescales when, you have a student who's starting and working on something for 4 or 5 years on their PhD. And, that's different than an organization that wants information right away. And so actually really over the past, 8 or 10 years with my research group, I've been trying to hire out. I mean, actually, Carol, you mentioned that we've started working together more. And actually, you need to have professionals involved to have a fast turnaround. So like when the DNR with Gail's group said that they'd like some help analyzing electric vehicles, we were able to do it because I'm working with both students and with professionals. But that's a hard thing to juggle, and it takes a lot of funding to support professionals as well as students, as well as everything else in academia. So, I think the Biden administration, the funding issue that Chris mentioned is really huge. But I would also say that, within the organizations that are part of the federal government, environmental justice has been like a term, an idea, a topic for a long time, but it has not been a priority. And a good example of that is this model that the EPA has, not model, but kind of web mapping tool that the EPA has developed called EJ Screen. And it's been around for a very long time. And it's actually the basis that a lot of different states are using for their own environmental justice mapping tools. But now suddenly it is like the coolest kid in town. And actually they're using EJ Screen as the backbone of the climate justice mapping that is supporting the Biden administration's allocation of funding to underrepresented communities. And, in my work with NASA, I know that, the Biden administration is putting environmental justice as a huge priority issue. But they're also putting as a priority issue ways to leverage the different strengths of the federal government, like making satellite data more relevant for energy analysis and planning. And so, actually one thing that we're doing here at Wisconsin is we're already planning a conference for next October on the topic of using satellite data to support energy planning. And that's different than air quality, but definitely a close cousin, because anything we do for energy, what cars we drive, what industries we have, affects what's in the air and affects our ability to achieve carbon reduction goals. And, I'll just, since we're kind of like riffing on different topics, I see Kermit put a very nice question about Jonathan Patz and his work on health co-benefits. And, Jonathan works very closely with me and with Carol and many of the folks on the call. And, really, Jonathan has been a leader in first evaluating the health impacts of climate change, like malaria and dengue fever, and for the past few years has been doing a lot and pivoting toward the health benefits of climate solutions. And so, I'd say that he's, one of a community of people, including Chris, including many of our colleagues really around the US and around the world who've been working for decades, evaluating how you get these win-win solutions. So I would say, Jonathan is an excellent leader in that field, but it's a team effort.
All right, thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, I have one additional point, Carol. Would that be all right? I just wanted to kind of jump on. Tracy was mentioning EJ Screen, and I did want to mention here, the DNR is one of 4 agencies working on development of a Wisconsin environmental equity tool that will provide hopefully a little bit more in terms of screening and mapping, things like that. It hasn't been developed yet. There's some listening sessions coming up, I believe next week. So I did want to mention that WEACH, or the Wisconsin Environmental Equity Tool, it's another place where we're really seeing at the DNR environmental justice and equity work. Thanks for letting me jump in.
Yeah, no, glad to know that. I wanted to also give Langston a chance to talk about his work trends in, at the Milwaukee Department of Health. How are things looking now with respect to focus on environmental justice, especially with air?
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you, but I just don't know. I mean, frankly, I've been with the department for about 30 days. I know a lot of the funding that's coming from the feds right now is really focused in on lead poisoning prevention in the Milwaukee area, rightfully so. It may be also coming into other areas. I'm just not privy to those conversations. So apologies, I don't have a better answer for you.
Not a fair question, I guess, if you're only 30 days in. I have a different question for you, Langston, which is, I'm sitting here in academia and some of the rest of us are too. What does an air quality stakeholder look like in the city of Milwaukee? I mean, I don't mean actually look. I mean, what are the different groups? What do they care about? What is their angle?
Yeah. That's a good question, and the reason I started this project really is because our asthma coalition in the Milwaukee area, which is primarily, I mean, they are all folks who are passionate about asthma. It's a lot of school professionals, school nurses, teachers. There's also a ton of doctors, respiratory therapists, and then just families who have kids who are struggling with asthma. And they're all concerned about air quality. When I first started this project, it was a few weeks before the 4th of July. And so I got my very first monitor up and I was hanging out in the backyard. And this was the pandemic 4th of July, when everybody had their own fireworks in their own communities, in their own backyards. And I'm sitting in my backyard with my kids. My daughter has asthma, thankfully very well controlled asthma. And we're in the backyard and I'm just looking around and you could see the particulates in the air, right? And you could smell it, you could feel it. And it dawned on me, I was like, look at the air monitor, like see what it's telling me, because I hadn't even set up my notifications just yet. And it was the worst I've ever seen it. And every 4th of July, it's like off the charts bad. Luckily with that type of particulate though, it only takes a few hours for it to go away. And then we're kind of back to normal by morning. Maybe Chris knows a little more than I do about it, but at least from my monitors, it was like, we were back to square one by the next morning. And so I think all of us, if we're passionate about improving air quality in our communities, if we're passionate about having thoughts and conversations around reducing the impacts of climate change, then it's all of us.
All right, indeed, yes. So I have a question that relates to the little monitors, and also on all the way up to Gail's system of monitors that she's working with all the time. How operational, how short term could responses be through government to protect people? Or are there better non-government ways to protect people in the case of bad air quality? I mean, we know about air quality advisory days, or can you talk a little bit about how we are protected from instances of bad air quality and how that could change? That's either, anybody who wants it, maybe Gail first.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to start that one off. It's a great question. Obviously, we use our monitoring network here to provide information and data to the public, exactly for air quality and health reasons. We have a webpage that's accessible anytime, where you can go and look at the air quality at any of our monitors anytime you like. That helps, I think, in making some decisions. If you're a sensitive group, elderly, have asthma, things like that, and you're seeing unhealthy for sensitive groups, with our data, you can make some decisions about how you want to spend your day, right, and whether or not you want to be outside. That's a service that we provide, like I said, all the time through our web maps. In terms of how we use that kind of longer term, through the Clean Air Act, and there's actually a number of national ambient air quality standards that data can be used for. So over time, and typically when a standard is set and you're looking at areas that are attaining that standard or not, you're looking at data in kind of 3-year chunks. So hopefully that helps kind of answer your time question a bit. Through a very defined, very timed process, we can look at our data and determine if an area is attaining a standard or not. The kinds of monitors that Langston is using, and things like the IQ Air or Purple Air, those are really great tools for understanding if something is changing. So as Langston mentioned, they don't exactly, the data doesn't match up quite with regulatory monitoring, but if you see a change because of that monitor, or kind of see something increasing, that can be an indication that something's happening that you may want to be alerted to. So those sensor monitors have really a strong place in just being able to understand what's going on around you and protecting your health. I hope that helps answer some of your question. I'd be really curious what other panelists would say here.
So anybody else with operational? Sounds like satellite, Tracy. Is it?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to get information to people. And, I think the National Weather Service puts out air quality forecasts. The back page of USA Today lists air quality for the day. If you turn on your iPhone or smartphone, your weather app probably tells you the air quality. I think getting information to people isn't a problem. We could always do it better. We could do it with more bells and whistles or more accuracy. But I think the real question is, what do people do with the data when they have it, is question one. And I'm not going to answer that because Langston has a lot of thoughts about how to empower people to take action. But I think a second question is, how do we, is there something we can do to make the air cleaner? We've just said that these pollutants only stay in the atmosphere for a couple of days. So if we know that it's going to be a problem, is there something we could do to avoid the problem? And that is a question that some places are testing out. Actually, the environment minister of, I believe it's Chile, got his PhD with a colleague of mine, Greg Carmichael at the University of Iowa, doing air quality forecasting. And so then when he went back to his home country to lead their environmental efforts, he actually wove air quality forecasting into his management of the country's air quality, with the idea that if there was a weather event that was going to trap the pollution, they might, tell people not to barbecue on the soccer days or things like that. That was in a talk that I heard him give once. Here in Wisconsin, we don't do anything like that, but in parts of the US like California and Arizona, they do have no burn days, where if the weather patterns are going to suggest that it's going to be a high particulate day, that they might issue a ban on burning. So there are knobs that could be turned in response, both on the health side, which Langston can talk about, and on the emission side. But I'd say that right now, that's sort of more at the edges of what's happening as opposed to any central part of the management plan.
All right, thank you.
If I can add something, I mean, there's, when you talk about what can we do, there can be kind of big tensions in between, our ability to promote public health and our desire to maintain individual freedoms, and that's it's an ethical question. It's also an operational question about kind of what policies are actually practical to implement. I remember, a while ago, it seems like a very long time ago now, that the EPA put out some sort of announcement about how if you're barbecuing, you want to clean out the drip pan because otherwise you just get a lot more smoke, and that's bad for you. And there's this huge outrage about how the Obama administration was going to take away our barbecues, and they're coming for apple pie next or whatever. And so it's it's a really tricky question a lot of time.
Thanks. All right, Langston, you've been teed up.
Yeah, so funny, but also so ridiculous. And so, why am I not surprised with what Chris just said? I didn't see that when that came out, but I 100% believe it. I think one of the things that's going to be is important to focus on is how are we responding with interventions with an equity lens. We could do a county-wide notification, which may or may not be useful when air quality worsens. I think often for folks who don't really need it, unless it's really bad that we all need it, but in most cases, it's for folks who are at risk, right? Those kind of vulnerable populations who need that information. And there's that risk if you continually send out this notification to everyone, it kind of has that wallpaper effect, right? We hear it, we see it, we get used to it. Doesn't really matter to me, so I'm not gonna do anything about it. And so that's a challenge. I think we have to take a focused approach to targeting interventions in the communities that need it most. We know because of historical injustice and racism that communities of color have been forced into communities that are, from an environmental lens, they're doing, not so great. It's probably a light way to put it, right? And so how do we target our interventions in these communities that need it most? And I don't know what those interventions are. And, I take the approach of letting the data tell me where I should go as it relates to policy and intervention, but also having conversation with the communities who are most impacted and saying, what do you want? What's going to be of benefit to you versus me, who I don't live in that community, right? I don't want to come in from an outsider lens and say, this is going to be the fix. This is what we know is right for you. And I think that's one of the places where government gets it wrong frequently, where academia gets it wrong frequently, where we all need to take a step back and say, let's listen to the voice of the folks in the community and find out what they need. And so, and I know the folks on this call are well aware of that. And that's part of, why we're having this conversation, is to create an equitable response to these climate injustices. And so those community level interventions is really where I would push us.
All right, thank you for that. And on that note, inspirational note, I'm gonna wrap up the Q&A period here. I would like to thank our guests very kindly from wherever you are in webinar land, if you can give some appreciation. And I would like to hand the virtual mic back to Scott.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Carol, for doing the moderating today and asking some great questions. And yeah, if you haven't seen, many of our panelists have been answering questions in the Q&A box. So take some time to look through that before we wrap up here, if you didn't hear them as they're speaking here. Again, a reminder that we'll have our next Forward in Energy Forum on November 30th, talking about agriculture and carbon markets. And also wanted to plug Carol's Western Roundtable series tomorrow, which Chris Tessman will be the presenter for. So if you want to get a little deeper dive into Chris's work, you can come to mechanical engineering or watch the video recording. Is that correct, Carol? All right, yeah, so 4 o'clock or 4:15 tomorrow, mechanical engineering for the Western Roundtable series. Yeah, thanks for joining us, for asking great questions. And we hope to see you next month for our next Forward in Energy Forum.